My mail carrier knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon in late October and said something that stopped me cold. "Mrs. Sutton, I don't want to overstep, but I've noticed something and I think you should know." I'd lived in my house on Birchwood Crescent in Guelph for 22 years. My husband Gerald and I had bought it the summer our son Trevor turned 3. We'd planted the maple in the front yard ourselves. We'd painted every room twice, argued over every shade of beige, laughed about it later. Gerald passed away 4 years ago, a heart attack sudden, no warning, and I'd spent the first year not knowing what to do with all the quiet. But I found my footing. I had my routine. Tuesdays I volunteered at the Guelph Public Library, helping seniors with their digital devices. Thursdays I did my grocery run to the Real Canadian Superstore on Stone Road. Fridays I had coffee with my friend Beverly from down the street. I was 67 years old, retired from 30 years of teaching grade 4, and I was managing just fine. The mail carrier's name was Darius. He'd been on our route for about 3 years. We'd exchanged pleasantries, talked about the weather, the usual. He was a quiet, polite man in his 40s, always professional. So when he appeared at my door, instead of just dropping the mail in the slot, I knew he wasn't there to chat. "What is it?" I asked. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "A few weeks now, maybe 6, maybe 7, on Tuesdays, when I come by around 11, there's a car in your driveway. A silver Honda Civic, and the front curtains are open when they're usually closed." He paused. "I assumed it was family, but last Tuesday I was running late and saw you come home around 3:30, and the car was just leaving as you came up the street. I thought maybe you didn't know." I stood there in my doorway holding a dish towel, my mind going perfectly blank. "A silver Honda," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am, every Tuesday that I've come through, like clockwork." I thanked him. I told him I appreciated it. I closed the door and stood in my front hallway and listened to my own breathing. I volunteer every Tuesday from 9:30 to 2. I leave at 9 sharp. I have done this for 3 years. Someone had been coming into my house every Tuesday while I was gone. My first instinct was to explain it away. I tried very hard to explain it away. Maybe a neighbor had a key from years ago. I'd given one to Beverly once when we were on vacation, but she'd returned it. Maybe Trevor's wife had a copy somehow. My daughter-in-law had stayed with us years before Gerald died, and I had a vague memory of cutting an extra key at the time. Maybe she was, what? Checking on the house? Picking something up? For 6 weeks? Then I thought about the things I'd noticed. Small things. Things I'd told myself were nothing, blamed on my own absent-mindedness. The throw blanket on the armchair in the living room folded differently than how I leave it. I always fold it lengthwise. It had been folded in thirds. A mug in the drying rack that I didn't remember washing. I drink 1 cup of tea in the morning, and I'm meticulous about washing up immediately. There had been a second mug there, 2 different mornings, and both times I'd convinced myself I simply didn't remember. The smell of a different soap in my downstairs bathroom. Something floral and sharp, not my lavender Dove. I'd thought it was drifting from somewhere. Gerald's coin collection, an old Canada Post Centennial set in a wooden box that he'd kept in the study, had been moved from the top shelf to the middle. I'd noticed it the previous month and thought I must have moved it myself and forgotten. I went to the study now and opened the wooden box. Every compartment was still full. The coins were there. So I wasn't dealing with a thief who took everything. The taking, if there was taking, was selective. I went to my kitchen and reached for the envelope I kept in the back of my recipe binder. Gerald's system. He'd grown up in a family that didn't fully trust banks, and he'd always kept $200 in 20s tucked behind my mother's butter tart recipe. I hadn't touched it in months. I counted it out on the kitchen table. $140. I counted again. 140, $60 gone. I sat down at my kitchen table in the quiet of my own house and felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone knew my schedule. Someone had a key. Someone had been walking through my rooms, eating at my table, drinking from my mugs, taking small amounts of cash, small enough that I might not notice, small enough that if I did, I might chalk it up to my own forgetfulness. I was 67 years old and I lived alone. That was what they were counting on. I didn't call Trevor that night. I knew how that conversation would go. He would say, "Mom, are you sure?" He would say, "You probably just spent it and forgot." He would use that careful, gentle voice he'd been using with me since Gerald died, the one that said, "I love you, and I'm worried about you," in the same breath. And his wife would be in the background, and I'd hear her voice eventually, and she'd be so very concerned. I didn't call the police either. What would I say? That $60 was missing? That a blanket was folded wrong? That my mail carrier had seen a car? Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought very carefully about what I knew and what I needed to know. By 9 o'clock, I'd made a decision. I went to Best Buy the following morning when it opened at 10. I told the young man who approached me exactly what I needed. A small camera, hidden. Battery that lasts at least 8 hours. Good enough resolution to see a face clearly. He didn't look surprised. He showed me 3 options. I chose the one that was small enough to fit behind a row of books on my living room shelf with a clear line to the front door. $218 on my Visa. Worth every cent. I spent Friday evening learning how to use it. My friend Beverly would have laughed. She's always teasing me about how long it takes me to learn new technology. But I figured it out. I charged it overnight. Saturday, I did a test run, went outside for an hour, came back, and watched 12 minutes of footage of my empty living room. The angle was good. The timestamp was accurate. I felt a strange, calm purposefulness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Monday night, I barely slept. I lay in bed thinking through every scenario, every face, every possibility. Tuesday morning, I was up at 7. I made oatmeal, washed my bowl, got dressed. At 8:45, I activated the camera. The little red light blinked twice and went dark. I positioned it carefully behind my row of Mavis Gallant novels on the shelf beside the front door, angled to capture the entrance and the living room. Before I left, I did something I'd read about in the novel once. I took a single strand of my gray hair and pressed it against the lower edge of the door frame in the narrow gap between door and wood. If the door opened, the hair would fall. It sounds old-fashioned. Gerald would have thought it was charming. I locked up, walked to my car, and drove to the library. I could not have told you a single thing about those 4.5 hours. I showed a woman named Ruth how to attach a photo to an email. I helped an older gentleman reset his tablet password. I laughed at the right moments. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. At 2:15, I told the volunteer coordinator I had an appointment and headed home early. I came up Birchwood Crescent slowly. There was no silver Honda in the driveway. They'd already gone. But when I reached my front step, I looked down at the door frame. The hair was gone. I let myself in, locked the door behind me, engaged the chain. Something I hadn't done in 20 years. I retrieved the camera from behind the books, brought it to the kitchen table, and connected it to my laptop with shaking hands. I pressed play. For 40 minutes, nothing. The empty living room, autumn light moving slowly across the floor. Then, at 10:53, the front door opened. I stopped breathing. 2 people came in. The first was my daughter-in-law. and behind her was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, athletic build, dark jacket, moving through my front hallway with the ease of someone who had been there many times before. She pulled off her coat and hung it on my hook. My hook! She walked into my kitchen like she lived there. "She won't be back until at least 3, she said, not quietly, not worried. The man settled onto my couch, Gerald's spot, and looked around. "You said she's been noticing things." "She mentioned the blanket to Trevor. He told me." She opened my refrigerator. "She's not going to figure it out. She's sweet, but she's not the type to push." Not the type to push. I paused the video. I sat very still in my kitchen. I pressed play again. The man, she called him Kyle at one point, and later just laughed and said, "Stop worrying about it, Kyle," pulled a folder from a bag he'd been carrying. He spread papers on my kitchen table. My kitchen table. The same table where I was now sitting. "This is the one," he said, pointing at something. "The comps on Birchwood are strong right now. Semis are going for 780. Detached will do better than that easily. If she lists in spring, even with the market cooling." "She's not listing," my daughter-in-law said flatly. "She'll never agree to sell." A pause. "Then we need Trevor to have the conversation." "Trevor's not ready." "He needs to get ready." Kyle shuffled the papers. "If we're doing this properly, if we want to be protected legally, it has to come from him. Power of attorney, then we list. She can go to one of the retirement communities out on Stone Road. They're nice, actually. She'd be fine." "She won't see it that way." "She doesn't have to see it at all. She just has to sign." I watched the rest of the footage 4 times. I needed to see it all. I needed to understand the full shape of it. In 2 hours and 11 minutes, this is what happened in my house without my knowledge. My daughter-in-law and this man, Kyle, ate food from my refrigerator, made sandwiches, left the cutting board out, which she rinsed and put away. They went through the mail I kept in a basket on the sideboard, photographed several envelopes with a phone. They went into Gerald's study, and I watched Kyle spend nearly 8 minutes going through the wooden shelves, pulling out the coin collection box, opening it, writing something in a notebook. Near the end, my daughter-in-law sat at my kitchen table and wrote 2 checks from my checkbook, the one I kept in the drawer beside the telephone. She wrote them slowly and carefully. I couldn't read the amounts from the camera angle, but the motion was unmistakable. She signed them with my name, and she put them in her coat pocket. I went to the drawer. My checkbook was there. I flipped to the stub record at the back. The last 2 stubs, in handwriting that looked almost but not quite like mine, read $275 and $340. I opened my online banking on my laptop right there at the kitchen table. I've been with TD for 30 years. I found the transaction history and sorted by check number. 11 checks, over 8 months, amounts ranging from $150 to $400, all made out to 2 different names I didn't recognize, payable to cash equivalents. Total, just over $3,200. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Susan Park. She's been my lawyer since Gerald and I bought this house. She's thorough, direct, and she does not waste my time. "Don't touch anything," she said, once I'd explained. "Don't move the checkbook. Don't say anything to Trevor or his wife. Don't deposit or withdraw anything that isn't part of your normal routine. Come see me tomorrow at 1 and bring your laptop." I came. I showed her the footage. I showed her the bank records. She was quiet for a long moment after the video ended. "Margaret," she said. She's known me long enough to call me that. This is elder financial abuse under the Criminal Code of Canada. Uttering forged documents, potentially fraud over $5,000, depending on what else we find. This isn't a family disagreement. This is a crime. I knew that. but hearing it stated plainly in a lawyer's office in those specific words made it real in a way it hadn't been before. What do I do? First, we freeze access. I'm going to help you contact TD today to flag the account and pull records of every check going back 2 years. Then we go to the police. She paused. I also want to talk to you about Kyle. You know him? She pulled up something on her computer. Kyle Mercer, licensed real estate agent in Wellington County. He's been disciplined once before by RECO, the Real Estate Council of Ontario, for a transaction that involved undue pressure on a senior client. She turned the screen toward me. There was his face, the face from my video. He'd done this before. I went home that afternoon and installed a second camera, this one in the kitchen, hidden in the ceramic fruit bowl I'd always kept on the counter. I also changed my locks. I had a locksmith come the next day, a woman from a local company, very professional, very fast, and I had all 3 exterior locks rekeyed. Then I went to Beverly's. I hadn't planned to tell her, but Beverly has been my friend for 18 years. We met at school pickup when our boys were in the same class. She watched me through Gerald's illness and through his death. She came over with food for 2 weeks after the funeral. She is the person I call when I need to think out loud. I told her everything. She sat on her couch with her tea going cold and listened without interrupting, which is not like Beverly at all. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" I need a witness, someone who can confirm I'm not confused, not declining, not imagining things. Done. She paused. And I need you to let me call my son-in-law. Her son-in-law, it turned out, was a detective with the Guelph Police Service. His name was Constable. Detective Constable, sorry, Beverly corrected me. Nathan Webb. He came over that evening and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a very calm expression and let me tell the whole story from beginning to end without once suggesting I was being paranoid. He watched the footage on my laptop. He looked at the bank records. "Mrs. Sutton," he said when I'd finished, "you've done excellent documentation work. Most people in this situation are afraid to do anything official because they don't think they'll be believed. They lose months of evidence." He looked at his notes. "I'd like you to come to the station to file a formal report, and I'd like your lawyer to be there." "When?" "When?" "Tomorrow, if you can." I could. The report took 3 hours. I told it all, from Darius at the door, to the footage, to the checkbook, to Kyle Mercer's name. Detective Constable Webb was thorough in a way that felt respectful rather than bureaucratic. He assigned a file number. He explained the next steps. He explained that the RECO complaint against Kyle Mercer would be relevant. On the way home, I called Susan Park from the car. "They're moving," she said. "Let them. The more they do before they know you know, the more we have." That was Thursday. Tuesday came around again. I activated both cameras at 8:40. I placed the strand of hair across the doorframe, a ritual now almost comforting. I drove to the library. I volunteered. I helped Ruth again. She was getting better at attachments. I helped 3 other seniors and drank a cup of bad coffee from the break room and felt the whole time like my chest was full of static. Beverly texted me at 11:07, "Silver Honda in driveway." Detective Constable Webb had instructed me to let this visit happen. Let them come. Let the cameras capture it. Don't confront yet. But at 1:15, I couldn't stay at the library any longer. I texted Beverly, "I'm coming home, not going inside, just need to see." I parked 2 houses down. At 1:48, my daughter-in-law and Kyle Mercer came out my front door. She had her coat folded over her arm. He was carrying his bag. They were talking, relaxed, no urgency. She locked my door with her key. I sat in my car and watched them drive away, and I felt something cold and clear move through me, not grief, not fear, something more useful than both. I let 2 more Tuesdays pass before the confrontation. Not because I wanted to end it immediately, but because Susan and Detective Constable Webb both said the same thing. Let the evidence accumulate. Let it be undeniable. The bank, by this point, had pulled full records going back 26 months, 17 fraudulent checks, total $4,850. Close enough to $5,000 that the Crown would have the option to charge fraud over. It was the third Tuesday in November when I came home early and let myself in while they were still there. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen. Kyle Mercer was in the study. They heard the door and went still. I walked into the kitchen and looked at my daughter-in-law across the table where she had sat and written checks in my name and talked about putting me in a retirement home. "Hello," I said. My voice was calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. "Put down whatever you're holding and don't touch anything else." She set down my checkbook. "I have footage of every visit," I said. 17 of them. I have bank records. I have a police file number. I have a lawyer. I have a real estate investigator looking into Mr. Mercer's activities specifically. The only decision left for both of you is whether you'd like to leave now or wait for Detective Constable Webb to arrive. Kyle Mercer appeared in the study doorway. "Mrs. Sutton, I wasn't speaking to you. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Tell Trevor whatever you like tonight, but I would encourage honesty because he's going to hear the truth from me in the morning, regardless." She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say anything. She picked up her coat and her bag and she walked out of my house. Kyle Mercer followed. I heard my front door close. I sat down in my kitchen chair and shook for 10 solid minutes. Then I called Beverly, and she was over in 6. I called Trevor the next morning at 8. He answered on the second ring, which told me she hadn't warned him. "Mom, everything okay? I need to see you today, alone. Please come for lunch." He came at noon. I made soup, creamy tomato from scratch, his favorite since childhood, and I sat him down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. I showed him the footage on my laptop. I watched his face as he saw his wife walk through my front hallway and open my refrigerator and write a check in my name at my kitchen table. I have never seen my son look like that. He went the color of the wall. He didn't speak for a long time. "How long?" he finally said. "At least 8 months that we can document." He put his face in his hands. I let him sit with it. I didn't rush him. "Did you know?" I asked, not accusingly. I needed to know. He looked up. His eyes were red. "No. Mom, no." He paused. "She's been talking about, she's mentioned the house, selling it, you moving somewhere with more support. I told her you weren't interested. I didn't know." He stopped. "I didn't know she was doing anything." I believed him. I still believe him. Trevor is not a dishonest man. He married a woman who was, and I think on some level he'd been choosing not to see it for a long time, the way you don't look directly at the thing you're afraid to find. "What do I do?" he asked. "That's between you and your conscience," I said. "What I need from you is a statement to the police and your truthful account of every conversation you had with her about this house and my finances." He gave it. My daughter-in-law was arrested 3 weeks later, charged with fraud over $5,000, uttering forged documents, and break and enter. She had, without my knowledge, made a copy of my spare key at some point, likely during a visit the previous winter. Kyle Mercer was charged as a co-conspirator, his real estate license immediately suspended pending the criminal proceedings. RACO opened a formal investigation. I had not expected the arrest to feel the way it did. I had expected relief or satisfaction or closure. What I actually felt, standing in my kitchen that Tuesday afternoon when Susan Park called to tell me, was tired. Not the bad kind of tired, the kind you feel after you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and you've finally been allowed to set it down. The trial happened the following spring. I testified on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom in downtown Guelph. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought for Gerald's retirement party. I told the jury what I had told everyone else, exactly what I had observed, when I had observed it, what I had documented, and how. I was not nervous. I had been a school teacher for 30 years. I knew how to speak clearly to a room. My daughter-in-law's lawyer tried to argue that she had implied permission, that as a family member with a history of visiting the house, she had reason to believe she was welcome. The footage of her writing checks in my name while discussing putting me in a retirement facility made that argument very difficult to sustain. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, guilty on all counts. My daughter-in-law was sentenced to 22 months in federal custody. Kyle Mercer received 18 months plus a permanent ban from practicing real estate in Ontario. The judge, a measured woman who had clearly seen a great many of these cases, noted in her remarks that financial exploitation of older adults was a serious and often unreported crime, and that Mrs. Sutton's methodical documentation had been, in her words, exemplary. I sat in that courtroom and heard my name and the word exemplary in the same sentence and thought of Gerald, who would have said, "I told you so" about the locks, and who would have been furious on my behalf, and who would have made me tea when we got home. I made my own tea. In the civil suit that followed, the court ordered full restitution of $4,850 in fraudulent checks, plus $12,000 in damages for emotional harm and violation of privacy. I set aside the entire amount, not for myself, but in a donation to the Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario program, and in a small fund I established with Beverly and Nathan Webb and Susan Park to offer free consultations to seniors in Guelph who suspect financial exploitation but don't know where to turn. We called it the Birchwood Resource. We've helped 14 families in the first 8 months. Trevor and I had a quiet, hard conversation in January after everything was over. I want to be honest about this part. It wasn't simple. He grieved his marriage, and he grieved his failure to see what was happening in front of him, and some of that grief looked, for a while, like distance from me. I gave him the space because it was the right thing to do, and because I understood it, even when it hurt. He came back. We have Sunday dinners now, sometimes with Beverly, sometimes just the two of us. He asks about the resource. He asks about the library volunteers. He's learning to make butter tarts from my mother's recipe, the real one, not the one I keep in the binder with the emergency cash. The emergency cash, for what it's worth, is in a different spot now. I'm not telling anyone where. I still have the camera on the bookshelf, not because I'm afraid, but because I am no longer someone who doesn't look. I am no longer someone who explains things away, who blames her own memory, who decides that because the alternative is too difficult to believe, it must not be true. Darius the mail carrier still waves when he comes up the walk. Last Christmas, I left him a tin of shortbread with a thank you card. He seemed embarrassed by it, which I found endearing. If I could say one thing to anyone listening to this, it would be, you know your own house. You know your own routines. You know when something has moved, when something smells different, when the numbers don't add up. You are not confused. You are not imagining it. Trust the small things because the small things are often the only warning you get. Document everything. Tell one person you trust. And never let someone else's comfort with a lie become your doubt about the truth. I'm glad you're here with me. Please tell me what city you're listening from. I always love to know how far these stories travel. There's a moment I keep coming back to, even now. It's not the courtroom, not the verdict, not the phone call from Susan telling me the arrest had gone through. It's sitting at my kitchen table the night after I watched that footage for the fourth time. The house completely quiet, my tea gone cold, and understanding with absolute clarity that the only reason any of it had worked, the cameras, the bank records, the whole careful chain of evidence, was because I had refused to stop trusting myself. That sounds simple. It wasn't. For weeks before Darius knocked on my door, I had been slowly, quietly talked out of my own perception. A blanket folded the wrong way became my forgetfulness. A second mug in the drying rack became my absent-mindedness. $60 missing from the envelope behind my mother's recipe became proof that I was getting old and losing track. The people doing this to me were counting on something that I think a lot of us, as we get older, are quietly afraid of, the fear that maybe we really are slipping, that maybe the people who love us do know better, that maybe the small confused feeling in our chest is the truth about ourselves rather than a warning about something else entirely. What I learned is that integrity, real integrity, the kind that holds even when no one is watching and nothing is certain, begins with being honest about what you actually see. Not what you wish were true, not what would be more comfortable to believe. What you see, the blanket was folded differently, the money was gone. Those were facts, not symptoms. And then there is the matter of thinking clearly when everything in you wants to react. I won't pretend I wasn't frightened. I won't pretend there weren't nights when I lay awake and thought about calling Trevor, about saying something too soon, about letting my hurt move faster than my judgment. But I waited. I documented. I called Susan before I acted. I let Detective Constable Webb guide the timing. That discipline, the choice to be methodical when you are also angry and betrayed and sad, is what made the difference between a case that held and one that fell apart. It is what turned $60 in a recipe binder into 17 fraudulent checks and a criminal conviction. Kyle Mercer had done this before. My daughter-in-law had been planning it for over a year. They chose me because they believed that a woman my age, living alone, missing her husband, would be easy to confuse and easier to dismiss. What they did not account for was that I had spent 30 years standing in front of a room full of children who needed someone to think clearly on their behalf. And that habit does not leave you when you retire. The last thing I want to say is about getting back up. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just continuing. Beverly showing up with tea. Nathan Webb sitting at my table with his notepad, not once making me feel small. Trevor coming back, slowly, genuinely. The 14 families we've helped through the Birchwood resource, who remind me every single time that the point was never only my own house. My house on Birchwood Crescent is still mine. The maple Gerald and I planted is taller every year. I lock my doors carefully, and I do not apologize for it. You know your own home. You know your own mind. Whatever anyone tells you to doubt about yourself, look at the evidence first. Then decide.